Hi guys, and welcome to Working with Non-Designers, a Tuts Plus premium course. I'm Ben Gribbin, and today we're going to consider how to simplify the process of working with developers, managers, and business owners. We're going to consider three main key points today. We'll look at how to properly communicate with clients to be understood, including how to remove jargon. Then we'll look at why you need to think like a non-designer, offering more advice than normal, and how to guide your client. It'll also include how to handhold your client to keep them happy and stress-free. Finally, we'll share some tips on how to be flexible with your workflow and how to remain approachable. If you're a designer of any sort, particularly a freelancer, eventually you will need to work with a non-designer. But what is and who are non-designers? Well, a non-designer is someone who knows little to nothing about design. This pool of people includes business owners who maybe have worked with designers before, developers who have an excellent grasp of highly technical coding languages but not aesthetics, as well as business owners, managers, and general employees. Working with these clients can at times get very complicated and frustrating for both sides. But if you take one thing away from this lesson, it has to be communication. We'll look at this in more detail now. Let's imagine it's your first meeting. You meet your client and you go and sit in their boardroom. Your client has contacted you because they wanted a website designing for a new product launch. They ask you if you have any initial feelings about the design, and immediately you tell them, let's go for something very minimal, clean and lightweight, using a sans serif font and a bright colour palette. Whilst what you've said is technically correct, many clients are just going to sit there absolutely bamboozled. What did they just say? They might even pretend to have understood and march on with the meeting, but this could eventually lead to later disappointment. So, how should you deal with such a situation? Set yourself two goals for the first meeting. Your first goal is to find out about the project, as you would any other project. The whole timeline, budget, goals, etc., in order to create a good design brief to work from. That's the things that you usually look out for. The second kind of goal you want, and perhaps the most important, is to try and meet the person, or at least speak to them on the phone, that you'll be working with. Ask them how much do they know about design. Often non-designers are pretty open about their design knowledge, and they'll tell you straight away that they don't know anything about leading or justification, anything like that. So once you've gauged their understanding of design, then you can decide how you'll tackle the project. And that'll include how you might adjust your workflow to suit them as a person, but we'll look at flexibility later. For now, let's think about how you can make yourself clearly understood. Jargon is great when meeting a fellow designer or chatting on blogs about inspirational design pieces. It'll save you time and, when used correctly, does display you know what you're talking about. But when working with non-designers, you really need to cut it. How much you cut it by is up to you, but if you think a client is up to it, then you might choose to go down the line of teaching them, bit by bit, the technical names for typographic variables or the concept of choosing an appropriate typeface for their audience. However, some clients will just glaze over the minute you mention anything slightly technical, so it may just be best to completely remove any confusing, non-essential language. This is more applicable if you're designing for the web in any way or shape, or just purely from the number of acronyms and complicated terms that exist. In this case, you may find you have to explain the nuts and bolts of how a website is constructed, but if you really have to do, then do it as simply as possible. Imagine you're teaching a highly intelligent alien who's never visited Earth before. This way, you'll offer concise, simple explanations, but without being patronising. To sum up, keep it simple and appropriate to the project leader or the client's level of understanding. Leading on from cutting jargon, thinking like a non-designer is going to help you further communicate clearly with your client. However, it also helps in the entire design process. Take 2 minutes to inform your client how the design process works, i.e. the brief, research, mock-ups, revision, etc. This is going to help them feel in the loop. If something is going to take a week to complete, inform them rather than just going off the grid, or at least in their eyes, without updating them on the status of the project. Clients don't understand that design, and particularly good design, can take time, so Keep them up to date by simply offering them an email or phone call every couple of days with updates. Tell them you've been working on making the text layout work for the intended audience. Explain you've been working on several variations of the layout and that you're close to showing them the mock-ups. If at all possible, try to offer them updates every few days, just so they can see that you're actually still working on the project and that everything's going fine. Be prepared when working with a non-designer to have to offer more advice than normal. In fact, you may in effect become an interpreter between their brief and the final outcome. This can be a refreshing change than working with some clients who have little but dangerous amounts of design knowledge and effectively turn you into a Photoshop operator. However, when offering advice, especially if you're suggesting they consider several options, always explain why. Give them the reasons behind why they should choose a certain course. Explain how it will impact on the final design or on their goals. Will it take more time to render or to code? This way, you give your client the power to make an educated choice for themselves. Then there's hand-holding. You'll likely want to avoid this if possible, but it's the best way to offer a pain-free experience when working with a client. In their head, design is a service. They tell you what they want and out pops the design 2 weeks later. The in-between processes and methods won't have even been given a second thought, so explain them. After the initial meeting or phone call, if they select to hire your services, tell them what happens next. What do you need from them? What happens now? Do you start creating mock-ups? If so, tell them. This can be quite a long-winded process and will often see you having to broaden your involvement in a project. For example, you might have to help them register a domain name, locate a billboard location, or oversee a printing run. But be open and honest with your pricing, e.g. tell them that you're going to have to charge them a little bit more money, but that you'll offer them more help, and your non-designer friends will really appreciate this extra level of service. I worked almost exclusively in this manner over my several years of freelancing, and from 90% of my clients I receive referral work and additional projects. So this really does help solidify your freelance business or your employer's sales charts. It may take a little more time, but you'll have thoroughly happy clients who recommend you to all their business associates and colleagues. Always be wary that you're not overstretching yourself, and you really can't go wrong. Finally, you must be flexible, approachable, and honest. These three qualities are perhaps more personality traits, but you must display them when working with non-designers, or in fact, any client. How can you be a flexible designer? You may have to modify or move away from your normal workflow, perhaps having to use a different software program, learning some sort of new skill, or adopting a client's preferred method of communication. Over the years, I worked with clients by internet messenger, phone, email, face-to-face, web broadcast, and even by SMS text messaging. Some clients don't have access to the internet, and they can only be contacted at certain times of the day, or you might have to work through a receptionist or an assistant or even a secretary with whom you have to kind of act as a medium. Though not ideal, with some patience you can get through a project like this. Be wary that working in such a manner may mean that the person or on the end of the phone has a differing degree of design ability, especially from your client, so you might have to adapt your approach as necessary. Speaking of approach, over my own freelance career I worked alongside developers quite often. It was an interesting role reversal type situation that led me to learn that you should always be approachable. Some clients had their own in-house developers, and once or twice I had bumped into your typical kind of coding geek. They would sometimes scoff at me for asking what OOP was or why things needed soak testing, but rather than being patient and explaining these concepts as we've already talked about, I would sense a bit of a hint of sarcasm or even a complete unwillingness to fill you in on the details. So don't fall into this trap. I had quite a negative view of those developers, and the last thing you want is your clients developing a similar feeling towards you. So don't scoff and scorn at them. If they have concerns a year down the line, even after the project is completed, do your best to help them out. Sometimes you may have to do so unpaid, but showing willing will almost all the time lead to further work. So offer good customer service and be approachable at all times. And finally, be honest. If something is a bad idea, tell your client why. If you feel that their request will cost them more money or make something too complicated, tell them and tell them why. This is critical. Your client will see that you're honest and in the future will see your advice as being something that should be noted. Also, it helps avoid situations where you've purposely or accidentally bent the truth, which will result in clients distrusting you or even moving on. So be honest 100% of the time, especially when working with non-designers, because they need the most advice. So we've learnt quite a lot today in this course. We've looked at how to be patient and how to communicate properly with your client. We've looked at how you can cut jargon. We've then considered how to be flexible, approachable, how to handhold your client. And then finally we considered honesty and how to show understanding and willing and how that will benefit you in the future. So that leads us on to your assignment. Now it's going to be perhaps more of a long-term thing, but with your next project, when you're working with a non-designer client, concentrate on the following: being patient, cutting jargon, being flexible and approachable, and above all, show understanding and willing. Next time on Design Fundamentals, we're going to cover troubleshooting your design. This is Ben Gribbin, and from all of us here at Tuts Plus, thanks for listening.